गुरु चरणन की मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की चरण बिना कछुवे नहीं भावे चरण बिना कछुवे नहीं भावे जग माया
I have nothing new to teach the world. Truth and non-violence are as old as the hills. All I have done is to try experiments in both, on as vast a scale as I could. In doing so, I have sometimes erred and learnt by my errors. Life and its problems have thus become to me so many experiments in the practice of truth and non-violence. Well, all my philosophy, if it may be called by that pretentious name, is contained in what I have said. But you will not call it Gandhiism. There is no ism about it, and no elaborate literature or propaganda is needed about it. The scriptures have been quoted against my position, but I have held faster than ever to my position that truth may not be sacrificed for anything whatsoever. Those who believe in the simple truths I have laid down can propagate them only by living them. I have not the shadow of a doubt that any man or woman can achieve what I have if he or she would make the same effort and cultivate the same hope and faith.
मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की
Strength does not come from physical capacity. It comes from an indomitable will. It is because we have, at the present moment, everybody claiming the right of conscience without going through any discipline whatsoever, that there is so much untruth being delivered to a bewildered world. I have learned through bitter experience the one supreme lesson: to conserve my anger, and as heat conserved is transmuted into energy, even so our anger controlled can be transmuted into a power which can move the world. Joy lies in the fight, in the attempt, in the suffering involved, not in the victory itself. Life is greater than all art. I would go even further and declare that the man whose life comes nearest to perfection is the greatest artist. For what is art without the sure foundation and framework of a noble life? Literary education should follow the education of the hand, the one gift that visibly distinguishes man from the beast. It is a superstition to think that the fullest development of man is impossible without a knowledge of the art of reading and writing. That knowledge undoubtedly adds grace to life, but is in no way indispensable for man's moral, physical, or material growth. To forget how to dig the earth and tend the soil is to forget ourselves. The music of life is in danger of being lost in the music of the voice. Don't be dazzled by the splendor that comes to you from the west. Do not be thrown off your feet by this passing show. The enlightened one has told you, in never-to-be-forgotten words, that this little span of life is but a passing shadow, a fleeting thing, and if you realize the nothingness of all that appears before your eyes, the nothingness of this material case that we see before us ever-changing, then indeed there are treasures for you up above, and there is peace for you down here, peace which passeth all understanding, and happiness to which we are utter strangers. It requires an amazing faith, a divine faith, and surrender of all that we see before us. God alone is the judge of true greatness because he knows men's hearts. The distinguishing characteristic of modern civilization is an indefinite multiplicity of human wants. The characteristic of ancient civilization is an imperative restriction upon and a strict regulating of these wants. The golden rule is resolutely to refuse to have what millions cannot. This ability to refuse will not descend upon us all of a sudden. The first thing is to cultivate the mental attitude that will not have possessions or facilities denied to millions, and the next immediate thing is to rearrange our lives as fast as possible in accordance with that mentality. This is the unmistakable teaching of the Gita. He who gives up action falls. He who gives up only the reward rises. But renunciation of fruit in no way means indifference to the result. In regard to every action, one must know the result that is expected to follow, the means thereto, and the capacity for it. He who, being thus equipped, is without desire for the result, and yet is wholly engrossed in the due fulfillment of the task before him, is said to have renounced the fruits of his action. Love is the subtlest force in the world. All your scholarship, all your study of Shakespeare and Wordsworth would be in vain if at the same time you did not build your character and attain mastery over your thoughts and your actions. The only tyrant I accept in this world is the still small voice within. Does not the history of the world show that there would have been no romance in life if there had been no risks? The wife is not the husband's bond-slave, but his companion and his helpmate and an equal partner in all his joys and sorrows, as free as the husband to choose her own path. Absolute calm is not the law of the ocean, and it is the same with the ocean of life. Chastity is one of the greatest disciplines without which the mind cannot attain requisite firmness. To a true artist, only that face is beautiful which, quite apart from its exterior, shines with the truth within the soul.
मोहि लागी लगन गुरु
Democracy, disciplined and enlightened, is the finest thing in the world. My notion of democracy is that under it, the weakest should have the same opportunity as the strongest. The spirit of democracy cannot be established in the midst of terrorism, whether governmental or popular. In my humble opinion, non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as is cooperation with good. Little do town dwellers know how the semi-starved masses of India are slowly sinking into lifelessness. Little do they know that their miserable comfort represents the brokerage they get for the work they do for the foreign exploiter, that the profits and the brokerage are sucked from the masses. Little do they realize that the government, established by law in British India, is carried on for this exploitation of the masses. Machinery, to be well used, has to help and ease human effort. The present use of machinery tends more and more to concentrate wealth in the hands of a few in total disregard of millions of men and women whose bread is snatched by it out of their mouths. I claimed for the charka, the spinning wheel, the honor of being able to solve the problem of economic distress in a most natural, simple, inexpensive and business-like manner. The charka, therefore, is not only not useless, but is a useful and indispensable article for every home. It is the symbol of a nation's prosperity and therefore freedom. It is a symbol not of commercial war, but of commercial peace. The spinning wheel means national consciousness and a contribution by every individual to a definite, constructive, national work. It was our love of foreign cloth that ousted the spinning wheel from its position of dignity. Therefore, real planning consisted in the best utilization of the whole manpower of India and the distribution of the raw products of India in her numerous villages, instead of sending them outside and rebuying finished articles at fabulous prices. A true and non-violent combination of labor would act like a magnet, attracting to it all the needed capital. Capitalists would then exist only as trustees. When that happy day dawned, there would be no difference between capital and labor. Those who labor will have ample food, good and sanitary dwellings, all the necessary education for their children, ample leisure for self-education and proper medical assistance. As I look at Russia, where the apotheosis of industrialization has been reached, the life there does not appeal to me. To use the language of the Bible, what shall it avail a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul? In modern terms, it is beneath human dignity to lose one's individuality and become a mere cog in the machine. I want every individual to become a full-blooded, fully developed member of society. Political power means capacity to regulate national life through national representatives. If national life becomes so perfect as to become self-regulated, representation becomes unnecessary. There is then a state of enlightened anarchy. In such a state, everyone is his own ruler. He rules himself in such a manner that he is never a hindrance to his neighbor. In the ideal state, therefore, there is no political power because there is no state. But the ideal is never fully realized in life. Hence the classical statement of Thoreau that government is best which governs least. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people cannot be conducted at the bidding of one man, however great he may be. Liberty never meant the license to do anything at will. In mass civil resistance, leadership is essential. In individual civil resistance, every resistor is his own leader. Nonviolence and cowardice go ill together. I can imagine a fully armed man to be at heart a coward. Possession of arms implies an element of fear, if not cowardice. But true nonviolence is an impossibility without the possession of unadulterated fearlessness. It is the acid test of nonviolence that in a nonviolent conflict there is no rancor left behind, and in the end, the enemies are converted into friends. That was my experience in South Africa with General Smuts. He started with being my bitterest opponent and critic. Today, he is my warmest friend. This is, in essence, the principle of nonviolent non-cooperation. It follows, therefore, that it must have its root in love. Its object should not be to punish the opponent or to inflict injury upon him. Even while non-cooperating with him, we must make him feel that in us he has a friend, and we should try and reach his heart by rendering him humanitarian service wherever possible. That is the beauty of satyagraha. It comes up to oneself. One has not to go out in search for it. Truth, satya, implies love, and firmness, agraha, engenders and therefore serves as a synonym for force. I thus began to call the Indian movement satyagraha, that is to say, the force which is born of truth and love, or non-violence. Ahimsa is the attribute of the soul, and therefore to be practiced by everybody in all the affairs of life. If it cannot be practiced in all departments, it has no practical value. Ahimsa is not the crude thing it has been made to appear. Not to hurt any living thing is no doubt a part of ahimsa, but it is its least expression. The principle of ahimsa is hurt by every evil thought, by undue haste, by lying, by hatred, by wishing ill to anybody. It is also violated by our holding on to what the world needs. Ahimsa and truth are so intertwined that it is practically impossible to disentangle and separate them. They're like the two sides of a coin, or rather a smooth, unstamped metallic disc. Who can say which is the obverse and which the reverse? Nevertheless, ahimsa is the means, truth is the end. Non-violence in its dynamic condition means conscious suffering. It does not mean meek submission to the will of the evildoer, but it means the pitting of one's whole soul against the will of the tyrant. Working under this law of our being, it is possible for a single individual to defy the whole might of an unjust empire, to save his honor, his religion, his soul, and lay the foundation for that empire's fall or its regeneration. And so I am not pleading for India to practice non-violence because she is weak. I want her to practice non-violence being conscious of her strength and power. No training in arms is required for realization of her strength. The force generated by non-violence is infinitely greater than the force of all the arms invented by man's ingenuity. Disobedience, to be civil, has to be open and non-violent. Civil disobedience is the inherent right of the citizen. He dare not give it up without ceasing to be a man. Civil disobedience is never followed by anarchy. Criminal disobedience can lead to it. Every state puts down criminal disobedience by force. It perishes if it does not. But to put down civil disobedience is to attempt to imprison conscience. Non-violence succeeds only when we have a real living faith in God. We must then evolve order out of chaos. And I have no doubt that the best and speediest method is to introduce the people's law instead of mob law. One great stumbling block is that we have neglected music. Music means rhythm, order. Its effect is electrical. It immediately soothes. I have seen in European countries a resourceful superintendent of police, by starting a popular song, control the mischievous tendencies of mobs. Unfortunately, like our Shastras, music has been the prerogative of the few, either the barter of prostitutes or high-class religious devotees. It has never become nationalized in the modern sense. If I had any influence with volunteer Boy Scouts and other organizations, I would make compulsory a proper singing in company of national songs. And to that end, I should have great musicians attending every congress or conference and teaching mass music. When a man submits to another through fear, he does not follow his nature, but yields to brute force. He who has no desire to dominate others by brute force will not himself submit to such force either. Recognizing, therefore, that man who fears brute force has not attained self-knowledge at all, our Shastras allowed him the use of brute force while he remains in this state. Forgiveness is the virtue of the brave. He alone who is strong enough to avenge a wrong knows how to love and forgive. He alone who is capable of enjoying pleasures can qualify to be a brahmachari by restraining his desires. There is no question of the mouse forgiving the cat. It will be evidence of India's soul force only if she refuses to fight when she has the strength to do so. It is necessary to understand what the phrase strength to fight means in this context. It does not mean only physical strength. Everyone who has courage in him can have the strength to fight, and everyone who has given up fear of death has such strength. We have to make truth and non-violence not matters for mere individual practice, but for practice by groups and communities and nations. That at any rate is my dream. I shall live and die in trying to realize it. My faith helps me to discover new truths every day.
Guru
Man often becomes what he believes himself to be. If I keep on saying to myself that I cannot do a certain thing, it is possible that I may end by really becoming incapable of doing it. On the contrary, if I have the belief that I can do it, I shall surely acquire the capacity to do it, even if I may not have it at the beginning. Religion is the tie that binds one to one's Creator, and whilst the body perishes, as it has to, religion persists even after death. I claim that human mind or human society is not divided into watertight compartments called social, political, and religious. All act and react upon one another. Prayer is the key of the morning and the boat of the evening. Do not worry in the least about yourself. Leave all worry to God. This appears to be the commandment in all religions. This need not frighten anyone. He who devotes himself to service with a clear conscience will day by day grasp the necessity for it in greater measure, and will continually grow richer in faith. The path of service can hardly be trodden by one who is not prepared to renounce self-interest and to recognize the conditions of his birth. Consciously or unconsciously, every one of us does render some service or other. If we cultivate the habit of doing this service deliberately, our desire for service will steadily grow stronger and will make not only for our own happiness, but that of the world at large. I believe in the fundamental truth of all great religions of the world. I believe that they are all God-given, and I believe that they were necessary for the people to whom these religions were revealed. And I believe that if only we could all of us read the scriptures of the different faiths from the standpoint of the followers of these faiths, we should find that they were at bottom all one, and were all helpful to one another. Faith is a function of the heart. It must be enforced by reason. The two are not antagonistic, as some think. The more intense one's faith is, the more it whets one's reason. When faith becomes blind, it dies. Close the day with prayer, so that you may have a peaceful night, free from dreams and nightmares. When I admire the wonder of a sunset or the beauty of the moon, my soul expands in worship of the Creator.
मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की, मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की। मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की, मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की। चरण बिना कछु।
The way of peace is the way of truth. Truthfulness is even more important than peacefulness. Indeed, lying is the mother of violence. A truthful man cannot long remain violent. He will perceive in the course of his search that he has no need to be violent, and he will further discover that so long as there is the slightest trace of violence in him, he will fail to find the truth he is searching. There is no halfway between truth and non-violence on the one hand, and untruth and violence on the other. We may never be strong enough to be entirely non-violent in thought, word, and deed, but we must keep non-violence as our goal and make a steady progress towards it. The attainment of freedom, whether for a man, a nation, or the world, must be in exact proportion to the attainment of non-violence by each. Let those, therefore, who believe in non-violence as the only method of achieving real freedom, keep the lamp of non-violence as the only method of achieving real freedom. Keep the lamp of non-violence burning bright in the midst of the present impenetrable gloom. The truth of a few will count. The untruth of millions will vanish even like chaff before a whiff of wind. It is impossible for one to be internationalist without being a nationalist. Internationalism is possible only when nationalism becomes a fact. That is, when peoples belonging to different countries have organized themselves and are able to act as one man. What I want you to understand is the message of Asia. It is not to be learnt through the Western spectacles or by imitating the atom bomb. If you want to give a message to the West, it must be the message of love and the message of truth. I do not want merely to appeal to your head. I want to capture your heart. In this age of democracy, in this age of awakening of the poorest of the poor, you can redeliver this message with the greatest emphasis. You will complete the conquest of the West not through vengeance because you have been exploited, but with real understanding. I am sanguine if all of you put your hearts together, not merely heads, to understand the secret of the message these wise men of the East have left to us, and if we really become worthy of that great message, the conquest of the West will be completed. This conquest will be loved by the West itself. The West is today pining for wisdom. It is despairing of a multiplication of the atom bombs, because atom bombs mean utter destruction, not merely of the West, but of the whole world, as if the prophecy of the Bible is going to be fulfilled, and there is to be a perfect deluge. It is up to you to tell the world of its wickedness and sin. That is the heritage your teachers and my teachers have taught Asia. If there were no greed, there would be no occasion for armaments. The principle of non-violence necessitates complete abstention from exploitation in any form. As soon as the spirit of exploitation is gone, armaments will be felt as a positive, unbearable burden. Real disarmament cannot come unless the nations of the world cease to exploit one another. The fashion nowadays is to take for granted that whatever America and England are doing is good enough for us. But the figures given by the writer of the cost to America of her armament are too terrible to contemplate. War has become a matter of money and resourcefulness in inventing weapons of destruction. It is no longer a matter of personal bravery or endurance. Do we wish to copy this method of defending ourselves? Even if we do, have we the financial ability? We complain of an ever-growing military expenditure, but if we would copy America or England, we would have to increase the burden tenfold. The nation cannot be kept on the non-violent path by violence. It must grow from within to the state it may aspire to. The question, therefore, for us to consider is, what is our immediate aspiration? Do we first want to copy the Western nations, and then in the dim and distant future, having gone through the agony, retrace our steps? Or do we want to strike out on an original path and thereby win and assert our freedom? Here there is no question of compromises with cowardice. Either we train and arm ourselves for destruction, but in self-defense, and in the process train for suffering too, or we merely prepare ourselves for suffering for defending the country or delivering it from domination. In either case, bravery is indispensable. In the first case, personal bravery is not of such importance as the second. In the second case, too, we shall perhaps never be able to do without violence altogether. But violence then will be subservient to non-violence and will always be a diminishing factor in national life. If the mad race for armaments continues, it is bound to result in a slaughter such as never occurred in history. If there is a victor left, the very victory will be a living death for the nation that emerges victorious. At the present moment, though the national creed is one of non-violence, in thought and word at least we seem to be drifting towards violence. Impatience pervades the atmosphere. We are restrained from violence through our weakness. What is wanted is a deliberate giving up of violence out of strength. To be able to do this requires imagination coupled with a penetrating study of the world drift. Today, the superficial glamour of the West dazzles us, and we mistake for progress the giddy dance which engages us from day to day. We refuse to see that it is surely leading us to death. Above all, we must recognize that to compete with the Western nations on their terms is to court suicide. Whereas if we realize that notwithstanding the seeming supremacy of violence, it is the moral force that governs the universe, we should train for non-violence with the fullest faith in its limitless possibilities. If we are to be saved, and are to make a substantial contribution to the world's progress, ours must emphatically and predominantly be the way of peace. It may be long before the law of love will be recognized in internal affairs. The machineries of governments stand between and hide the hearts of one people from those of another. There have been cataclysmic changes in the world. Do I still adhere to my faith in truth and non-violence? Has not the atom bomb exploded that faith? Non-violence is the only thing that the atom bomb cannot destroy. I did not move a muscle when I first heard that the atom bomb had wiped out Hiroshima. On the contrary, I said to myself, unless now the world adopts non-violence, it will spell certain suicide for mankind. It has been suggested by American friends that the atom bomb will bring in ahimsa, non-violence, as nothing else can. It will, if it is meant that its destructive power will so disgust the world that it will turn away from violence for the time being. This is very like a man glutting himself with dainties to the point of nausea and turning away from them only to return with redoubled zeal after the effect of nausea is well over. Precisely in the same manner will the world return to violence with renewed zeal after the effect of disgust is worn out. Often does good come out of evil, but that is God's, not man's plan. Man knows that only evil can come out of evil, as good out of good. That atomic energy, though harnessed by American scientists and army men for destructive purposes, may be utilized by other scientists for humanitarian purposes, is undoubtedly within the realm of possibility. But that is not what was meant by my American friends. They were not so simple as to put a question which connoted an obvious truth. An incendiary uses fire for his destructive and nefarious purposes. A housewife makes daily use of it in preparing nourishing food for mankind. So far as I can see, the atomic bomb has deadened the finest feeling that has sustained mankind for ages. There used to be the so-called laws of war which made it tolerable. Now we know the naked truth. War knows no law except that of might. The atom bomb brought an empty victory to the Allied armies, but it resulted for the time being in destroying the soul of Japan. What has happened to the soul of the destroying nation is yet too early to see. Forces of nature act in a mysterious manner. We can but solve the mystery by deducing the unknown result from the known results of similar events. A slaveholder cannot hold a slave without putting himself or his deputy in the cage holding the slave. Let no one run away with the idea that I wish to put in a defense of Japanese misdeeds in pursuance of Japan's unworthy ambition. The difference was only one of degree. I assume Japan's greed was more unworthy, but the greater unworthiness conferred no right on the less unworthy of destroying without mercy men, women, and children of Japan in a particular area. The moral to be legitimately drawn from the supreme tragedy of the bomb is that it will not be destroyed by counter-bombs, even as violence cannot be by counter-violence. Mankind has to get out of violence only through non-violence. Hatred can be overcome only by love. Counter-hatred only increases the surface as well as the depth of hatred. I am aware that I am repeating what I have many times stated before and practiced to the best of my ability and capacity. What I first stated was itself nothing new. It was as old as the hills. Only I recited no copybook maxim, but definitely announced what I believed in every fiber of my being. 60 years of practice in various walks of life has only enriched the belief which experience of friends has fortified. It is, however, the central truth by which one can stand alone without flinching. I believe in what Max Muller said years ago, namely, that truth needed to be repeated as long as there were men who disbelieved it. If we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. And if they will grow up in their natural innocence, we won't have to struggle. We won't have to pass fruitless, idle resolutions, but we shall go from love to love and peace to peace, until at last all the corners of the world are covered with that peace and love for which, consciously or unconsciously, the whole world is hungering. I want to realize brotherhood or identity not merely with the beings called human, but I want to realize identity with all life, even with such beings as crawl on earth. I do believe that all God's creatures have the right to live as much as we have. Instead of prescribing the killings of the so-called injurious fellow creatures of ours as a duty, if men of knowledge had devoted their gifts to discovering ways of dealing with them otherwise than by killing them, we would be living in a world befitting our status as men, animals endowed with reason and the power of choosing between good and evil, right and wrong, violence and non-violence, truth and untruth.
लगन गुरु चरणन की मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की।
writings should be cremated with my body. What I have done will endure, not what I have said and written. I've often said recently that even if all our scripture were to perish, one mantra of Ishopanishad was enough to declare the essence of Hinduism. But even that one verse will be of no avail if there is no one to live it. Even so, what I have said and written is useful only to the extent that it has helped you to assimilate the great principles of truth and ahimsa. If you have not assimilated them, then my writings will be of no use to you. Let Gandhiism be destroyed if it stands for error. Truth and ahimsa will never be destroyed, but if Gandhiism is another name for sectarianism, it deserves to be destroyed. If I were to know, after my death, that what I stood for had degenerated into sectarianism, I should be deeply pained. We have to work away silently. Let no one say that he is a follower of Gandhi. It is enough that I should be my own follower. I know what an inadequate follower I am of myself, for I cannot live up to the convictions I stand for.
मोहि लागी लगन गुरु चरणन की